Hi everybody, I've gotten the message that there are a lot of folks having difficulty figuring out how to actually apply the three paradigms. So I created this page for you in Canvas that has a short video of James Thurber's The Last Flower for you to watch, and hopefully you read the instructions and you watched The Last Flower before you made it down to this video here. So what I'm going to do, I have added the sociological paradigms cheat sheet here, and just completely off the cuff, I'm going to give you some examples of how I might interpret that video using each of the three paradigms. So, remember, this is only one person's interpretation. Other people could use these theories and apply them completely differently. And that's great because it gives us room for discussion and comparison and a way to then try to expand our understandings. So, just as an example, if we're looking at The Last Flower from a functionalist perspective, this means that we're going to be using just this column of the cheat sheet. Remember the view of society. Functionalists see society as stable and well integrated. How did I see that conveyed in that particular story? Well, at the beginning of the story, the World War XII had just happened and things were stable, but people were not well integrated. Things were stable in a very dysfunctional sort of way, in that people did not have close relationships with each other. And they showed this, or explained this, by pointing out that people just stared at each other and that love had gone from the world. And social integration, when we come down into important concepts here, social integration first came in when the boy or the man and the woman came together to try to save the last flower. And after some time, she started taking an interest in her appearance, and he started taking an interest in her as a person. And so a relationship started to be created. As that relationship was being created, there were social facts that were constructed between the two of them that eventually spread out into society. Social facts like redeveloping relationships with dogs, learning how to construct shelter, teaching other people how to construct shelter. That music and art and song and the division of labor came back into society, and that was exemplified by the tailors and the cobblers. People were able to specialize their skills in order to meet the needs of the society. As a result, with the view of the individual, with this, institutions start developing, such as eventually a military starts to develop, as well as liberators, people who are going to try to influence the actions of others. Then, dysfunction was at the beginning, so I wouldn't put a lot of attention on dysfunction in my interpretation, nor in this particular video would I put a lot of focus on anomie, the idea of normlessness, other than to note that at the very beginning of the story and then again at the end, all of the norms that had defined that society and how people interacted were destroyed as a result of war. So next, people are socialized to perform societal functions. This one was exemplified through, once again, any type of work that people do. If we have people specializing in becoming tailors and artists and poets, it means that there is somebody, it means that those skills and talents and values are being passed down to the next generation, so that the next generation is going to be taught these skills so that they can perform these functions and continue to serve society in that way. Cooperation and consensus was first seen with trying to save the first flower, and the idea that they were going to work together to make this happen. And there was a great deal of cooperation as people separated, and some went to live in the hills and some decided to live in the valleys. And it was a peaceful parting. And at some point, people must have agreed that task specialization was valuable, that there needed to be some kind of a military institution in order to protect what they had created. Now, as for social change in this, the idea that it promotes order and stability, that it's predictable, that it's reinforcing, well, the most positive examples there of the social change that we saw were, again, the examples of people coming together to work and create a new society, which was what the survivors of World War XII did. They created a whole new society. It did become very predictable, that people knew what other people's functions were. They knew what their own functions were. But unfortunately, part of what was also predictable from Thurber's perspective was, and remember, Thurber's the author of the story. He's not a sociologist. But from the perspective of his story, the other thing that was predictable is that after every cycle of peace, there is going to become a cycle of conflict or strife. And so with that, I would transition into conflict theory. Now we're just going to walk down this column. So conflict says that there is constant tension and competition between groups. We don't know what led to World War XII, but we can kind of infer that once again there was some sort of inequality down here that caused people to come into large-scale group conflict in order to have control over whatever resources that society had valued. And when we look at the inequality that develops, the inequality, the privilege, the stratification, not so much the capitalism in this particular video, but the inequality and the privilege that developed, initially was based on the idea that people went to different places to live and then they became regretful and each wanted to live in the place that the other group had chosen. So at that point, the resource that there would be some kind of tension over is going to be the location of their dwellings. And with the idea, the location of the dwellings was unequal, and that helped to illustrate the privilege. Also, as the armies started being built up again, we were shown the stratification of rank. There were soldiers and lieutenants and colonels and generals and major generals. So it showed that the society, or at least the members of the military, were being ranked in some way that was going to create a new inequality. As far as people being shaped by power, coercion, and authority, the liberators that stood up to motivate the people to take action were the ones who grabbed some kind of power and authority for themselves and tried to use that to manipulate the people into rising up against the current system, which ties into we maintain social order through force and coercion to maintain that unequal status quo. A military of any sort is oftentimes a great example of how those in power are going to use their power and their authority to maintain the system as it is, to ensure that those in power get to stay in power and those without power stay without power. Now, with the view of social change, that change happens often and may have positive consequences, what ends up happening in this video or in this story is that there at the end, we get to World War XIII. Eventually, the different sides come into major conflict with each other. The next war happens. Everything is destroyed. And once again, we're left at the point at the beginning of the story. So here's the potential for positive consequences. We're left with one man, one woman, and one flower. And so here is the next possibility for humanity, for society, to reconstruct itself, hopefully using a more positive structure and system, hopefully having learned from its past, so that maybe the future society will be better. Next up, the interactionist perspective. Beginning with society influences and affects everyday social interaction. The initial society, so to speak, in this story was a lack of interaction. People stared at each other blankly, and this was considered the social norm, and everybody maintained it. To such a degree that when the girl finds the last flower and she comes running up and says the last flower is dying, everybody ignores her, because the social norm is that people largely ignore each other. That, there is no love, there is no interest, there is nothing of value. But the flower becomes a symbol for cooperation and for new beginnings. And so, through this face-to-face interaction between the boy and the girl, and creating a new norm just between the two of them, that the flower has meaning, they may not only manage to save that, but saving that flower results in more flowers growing, so that the last flower becomes a symbol of rebirth and a symbol of renewal for everything about their society, for all forms of interaction between humans and animals, between children. Children start laughing and playing again. The view of the individual is that people maintain symbols and create their social worlds through interaction. Again, this happens between the boy and the girl as they are creating this new social norm of taking care of this flower, creating this new meaning, that it's the last one and it matters, that saving it matters. As a result, people start manipulating more symbols and start rebuilding their social world. They start manipulating stones and figure out that they can use that to build shelter. And once they've made that discovery, they can then figure out how to build more complex or more advanced shelters. And then by manipulating other materials and symbols and by communicating with each other how they did it, they were able to construct more and more elements of society that made it possible for them to meet their needs better. And that ties into maintaining the social order through shared understanding of values and shared expectations for social norms. So they have created it, but the problem is, as they hit this view of social change, it's reflected in people's social positions and their communication. So we have a pretty functional, collaborative, peaceful society until the liberators come in. And they use their social positions and they use their soapbox, their stage, in order to promote the idea through communication that the society as it is unequal, that it's not good enough, that the norms as they stand are not acceptable. This then leads to the next conflict, until we find ourselves at the end again with just two people and one flower, and the question remaining of, will these two people communicate with each other in order to initiate the rebuilding of society? So that is a really quick interpretation just off the top of my head. If I were writing it down, then I would make it a little more formal and more organized. But the idea as you're interpreting is to walk down each of these main ideas. I hope that helps.